All right, there we go.
There we are, and we are live. Thank you for everyone who has waited for us.
Cool. All right, so this is Ask Me Astros. It is our Cancer. Every time I think about it, I want to say Gemini season. It is not Gemini season anymore. Yesterday was the summer solstice. So now we are in Cancer season. The longest day of the year has passed, which breaks my heart just a little bit. I'm a sunshine person. But now we are in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, summertime. So congratulations to everyone who enjoys summer. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you are now coming into winter. And I hope that is warm and fuzzy for you as well in all of the ways that it can be. Today, we are going into an amazing question that really is relevant to the Venus retrograde coming up. So, CV, what are you thinking about today's question?
Well, I'm thinking we should introduce ourselves first. For those who've never tuned in before, it's funny you mentioned KristaLyn, the real KristaLyn, that you keep thinking it's Gemini season because I know Mercury moves so quickly, which is different from the sun, of course. But I think that this Gemini season just kind of like flew by and maybe scrambled some of our heads a bit. There's more to that. At any rate, yes, we are Ask Me Astros. I am personally Stevie Henriette of Art of the Zodiac, and my lovely friend here, the real KristaLyn, who opened this whole thing up. And what is this? Okay, so Ask Me Astros is a monthly YouTube offering where we answer one astrology question every month from people who submit questions to our website, askmeastros.com. We go through their charts. If we choose your chart, everyone whose chart we choose, they get 2 free readings, astrology readings, one from each of us, because we are astrologers. Okay. What am I missing from this intro for people who have never tuned in before, KristaLyn?
No, I think it's good. We're going to be going through the question that we chose for this month. And it is an anonymous chart reading. So we're not going to be mentioning any names to the person that we did choose the chart. Don't worry. We're going to email you and let you know. If you are tuning in and you're hearing this, you're going to hear the question that you submitted. But this way we keep the anonymity of the person who asked. And also, I do recommend taking advantage of the free reading with each of us, because you get 2 very different astrologers having an approach to your situation, to what you want to know about your chart. We're going to be keeping it pretty relevant to the current astrology so that it is translatable to everybody watching. So we'll be able to dive in a lot more personal and deeper in those consultations. And for everybody else watching, I will be dropping a 10% off code for all of you as well.
Absolutely. And just one more thing to drop, and I'll drop this again at the end. Every week we go live on IG for little coffee talks where we answer some of the questions that we don't get to every month. So submit your question. There's a good chance we'll answer it either on one of these episodes or on IG. And with that, I will share my screen. Let's see. Hopefully I do this in a way. Let's see. I have been terrible at using StreamYard today. So people, friends of the internet, astrology world, bear with me. Okay. Let's see. Okay. And we're doing it. Slide 1. Nope. We ended up on slide. That's okay, though. Oh, cool. And here we go. KristaLyn, would you mind reading the question?
So the question this month was, is there something in my chart that makes relationships so hard? Relationship as in a partner. I think my 7th house is ruled by Leo, but it is also empty. I don't really know what that means, just something I was told at some point. I've had 2 failed marriages and would love to be in a healthy relationship. I'm really working on seeing how I contributed to all the failures and what I can change and work on moving forward. So with this, I'm really excited about the quotes, CV, that you included, because one of the things that me as a life coach I'm seeing is this person is being too hard on themselves right off the bat. So before we even jump into a chart, hey, you're not the problem. It's not you. Hi, you're not the problem. It's not you. There's going to be a lot of situations, a lot of factors that when we went through your chart, there's a lot of stuff going on. And some of it is also just timing. And some of it is the encounters that you're having. So before we even dive into astrology, I want to make sure we nurture the mindset that you are not the problem. I wouldn't even consider these failures. I would consider them growth periods, because when you start considering yourself a failure, you lack the motivation to try again or to move forward or to grow. So those are things I just wanted to throw out
Absolutely.
there at the beginning. What do you think, CB?
Yeah, no, I'd love to build on that and say that the reason we know that you are not the problem, right? Of course, relationships take two people, right? So we're always the problem sometimes. But generally speaking, the reason we know you are not the problem is because you're the person going, hey, I'm trying to see my failures. I'm trying to see how to get better, right? So that level of awareness already shows that, hey, like you're in the right mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So, and possibly, as KristaLyn pointed out, being too harsh on yourself, because again, relationships take two people. And something else I want to build on that you said about timing and such, and relationships in general, I want to like pose this question, right? What is a healthy relationship? And what are necessary relationships? Sometimes we have to go, or I don't want to pose them, they're separate things. I should say, what is a failure and what is necessary growth, right? It may be that those relationships that you consider failures now were the steps you needed to, the relationships you needed at that time to create your idea of what a healthy relationship is. And so I think, as KristaLyn mentioned, getting rid of that word failure is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good add-on?
Yeah, and absolutely, because like you said, it does take two people, and usually it's not two people failing that makes a relationship not remain aligned for a duration. Sometimes relationships are meant to be short term. There's a quote out there, I can't remember which astrologer said it, but every encounter, every person we meet is a transit. And sometimes those transits remain, or those people remain for a long time, and sometimes they're for a short time. Girl Scouts used to say, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other is gold. You know, there's those kinds of things that happen in our lives. It's kind of one of those universal truths that we have. And just because two people aren't compatible doesn't make one or the other to blame in a situation, but it does mean that they don't have to remain in a situation that's not sustainable and compatible to them. So it might have been very wise, hard, difficult decisions you made that let both of you grow into who you are better. That's actually, there's a thing called teleology that I'm researching right now. It's the idea of a soul growing into who they're supposed to be. And we're all in that process in life. And so that was part of your process and part of the other person's as well. As someone who has we've both had rough relationships in the past, and we both wish the other person well, but they were not compatible. So it was a good thing that those relationships came to a close.
Absolutely. And the last is something that might be worth considering on that note, maybe with this person, just starting to think about, is there a pattern of people you've invited into relationships? And maybe that mind frame, something that we can switch in the future. But with that, let us move to the next slide, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just posed some questions here that we might think about as astrologers, right? What is the natal promise, right? Before even answering this question, what are the strengths and stories of this chart, or I would say the story? And what is the story of the seventh house? Because that's what they want to know, right? I have an empty seventh house. What is this? Are there any other questions you might ask at the beginning, KristaLyn?
No, these are my foundational questions as well. The only thing that I would add in, given the nature of the question, is also, is this a question for an astrologer only? Because astrologers, we can answer a lot of things here. We can offer context. One of the things that we are not in the position to do is offer like therapy and counseling and all of those things. But there are people out there who can help with that. So we can give you context. We can give you hope. We can give you prognostication. And we have counseling skills where we can do that in a way that is really supportive, but also consider what resources you do have available to you and how you might use someone in addition to astrology to really make sure that you do get the core of everything that you're getting from this this experience and the answers, all of them, that you deserve to these questions.
Absolutely, because I think what that's a brilliant add-on, because I think what we're going to discover as we go further with this chart is that there are a lot of questions that come up that I would really imagine need long-term contemplation that might be best with like having some support for, right? So whether that be like, you know, I like therapists, there are many kinds of therapists, but preferably, these are the questions that might be best dived into with someone there to hold your hand. And I move to the next slide. Okay, here we go. The chart itself. Again, with some questions that I just always ask. Many astrologers do some of the first things we ask when looking at a chart. There's a little bit of a recap here. Is this a day or night chart? Who is the ruler of the ascendant? What are the aspects from malefics and benefics? And in this case, who is the ruler of the seventh house? Do you want to start, KristaLyn, with the discussion of the chart?
Sure. So when we look at this and we say, is it a day or night chart? What we're asking was the sun up or was the sun down? And you can look at the chart and say, well, was the sun up? Is it in the top half of the chart? Noticing that the AS here and the DS are the ascendant and the descendant. And if you draw a straight line between them, you're actually creating the horizon of the earth that day that this chart was created, or that this chart happened, which was the day that this person was born. And so if the sun is beneath that or in the bottom hemisphere of this chart, we know that it was nighttime. So when you look at this, we actually know that both the sun and the moon were beneath the horizon at this point, which tells us that we were in the beginnings of a new moon cycle for the point that this person was born. So there was nothing in the sky visible, even save for Mars at this point.
Yeah.
So it is a night chart, which makes the moon a little bit more of the light that we pay attention to. And then when you look at the ruler of the ascendant, since the ascendant is at 0 degrees Aquarius, like you are Aquarius very decisively, as is Saturn's way, who would be the ruler of Aquarius in traditional astrology, and therefore the ruler of the chart. This is where, as an astrologer, I'd be like, how sure are we on that birth time? Because we want to make sure we have it very specific for this, because a matter of 4 minutes can change a degree in the ascendant. So 4 minutes one way or the other would have changed something. But we do have a very specific birth time here, so I'm confident with it. It's not like on a round number or anything. It doesn't make me question. Also, I think I know this person as someone who's been kind of with me on social media for a long time. So if you are who I think you are, hi, I've always appreciated your presence. But with that said, Saturn is the one we are looking at as the sort of helmsman or the steerer of this chart. Did you want to add anything to that or move on to the next thing, CV?
Yeah. Saturn has so as the helmsman, Saturn has a very important role. Saturn also rules the 12th house. And Saturn is also co-present with the sun, which is something that we'll come up to, that we will get into further. Let's see, aspects from, if we just look at the ascendant itself really quickly here, we might want to go, okay, so we have Aquarius rising. Saturn can see the ascendant. That's nice. Mars can also see the ascendant. Venus, can see the ascendant, right? That's nice. She's the benefic insect. Jupiter, although in a mixed position, exalted in Cancer, can't see the ascendant. That's not necessarily challenging, but not as maybe helpful as we'd like. The moon can also see the ascendant. And Mercury cannot. Mercury is kind of like floating in the second house, but we will dig into all these things later. And I will just introduce the fact that when you look to the ruler of the seventh, which is what we want to do next, because we want to see, well, before I jump into that, I'm going to ask you, KristaLyn, to answer the question. Maybe this is a good point to drop in. Why would we look to the seventh house for those who don't know astrology? And like this person's question was, I have an empty seventh house. What does that mean? Can you provide some context for people?
Yeah. So first of all, as more of a foundational thing, this person is asking about relationships. There are several things that an astrologer kind of peaks up with when we hear, ooh, relationships. And we talk about the natal promise. How much potential is there in this chart for relationships to the capacity of what this person is asking for, right? So we look at the seventh house for marriage and partnerships or contractual agreements. So this would be a long-term, in it for the long haul, sharing each other's resources. There is a contract between these two people situation. That is the seventh house. It is the opposite of the first house. So if the first house is you, the seventh is the other in a situation. This is also where your significant other can fall. In this chart, that is Leo. And because it is empty, which is accurate, that doesn't mean that it's not doing something. And it doesn't mean that there isn't attention here. We need to look at the ruler of Leo to get the context on what's going on. And at first glance, this is actually really helpful when you look at the ruler of Leo, because it is the sun in Aries, and the sun loves it there. It is exalted in Aries. There are aspects to this that do show there might be potential for challenges. I think we're going to get into that in a couple of minutes. But also I want to bring in, as we are preparing to talk about certain challenges and also some strengths and motivations, other two things or three things that I would look at when I'm thinking about relationships is, how are the benefics doing? Venus specifically, because she does help with relationships. And when you look at this, the benefics are doing really well in this chart. Venus, angular, domicile, direct, visible, all those wonderful things. Jupiter is exalted. Jupiter is even in his own terms. You can see there's a little tiny Jupiter right next to the dash of Jupiter in his exaltation, doing really well. The balance to that, though, I think is what we're talking about with the malefics. Did you want to cover a little bit about that?
Sure. I also want to add, and this is maybe, I don't know, unconventional, but I think when we want to see the nature of relationships, right? Like my interaction, like what is a relationship? It's in opposition to the first house in me. So what am I in relationship to another, right? Those are what relationships are. Seventh house relationships specifically, right? One-on-one. And I think we also, to a large degree, have to look at the ruler of the ascendant. Because if you have trouble maybe with confidence or seeing yourself, it might be harder to reap the benefits of relationships, right? And so when I'm looking at this chart, we see the ruler of the ascendant, which is Saturn, in a place where Saturn's kind of uncomfortable, right? Like Aquarius can already feel like the black sheep, a little like, what is this universe I have been dropped into, this sort of alien life place, right? There's this sort of cerebral outsider feel to Aquarius as it is. And then you get in this place where it's like Saturn just wants like order, Saturn wants slowness, and it's in like a volcano with the sun, right? And so we already get this like, feels like very like stop and go action with this Saturn with the sun, which can feel sometimes like self-restriction. That sun in Aries wants to be big and go, and Saturn's like, but not quite yet, right? And so we already see a little confusion with that, which already makes me think that, coming back to the beginning of the question, is like, are you maybe almost a little like self-deprivation, always being too, Saturn can make us in an uncomfortable place, can make us too hard on ourselves. Would you agree with that, KristaLyn?
Yeah. And also,
and
to your point,
and then please,
no, I don't want to cut off your point. Okay, so the first and the seventh ruler being in the same house of communication also makes me think that maybe communication is a very big key in relationships here. And I know, like in my personal relationships, Evie, I'm sure with yours as well, communication is the crux and the keystone of everything. I'm also married to a Gemini, so that might have something to do with it. But I think, the adage that communication is key even plays even more here. But also it seems like we have Saturn putting themselves down in a sense, and the sun being put on a pedestal in a sense. So this fact that maybe in communication, you're not letting yourself be fully represented all the time, and you're letting someone else almost talk over you and trusting them over your own instincts. That's something that might be something you work with in life, and that you build into a skill.
Ooh, that's really beautiful. I have a question. I was staring at this chart too, as we kind of build on this conversation, right? Just staring at the Sun Saturn conversation. We also see, like you pointed out, that this planetary conversation is having a stare down with Mars, the ruler of Aries, also in a very uncomfortable place. And we know that Mars in Libra in general can be some maybe difficulty relating, right? Sometimes it can feel like difficulty, maybe sometimes the balance of, am I being heard? How much do I give? How much do I take, right? That sort of sense of equality in a relationship with Mars and Libra can already be a little bit difficult, but it's staring down the Sun Saturn. So we see that there's a story being drawn out here. But what came to mind is, because it is Mars in the ninth house, the house of God, making an opposition to the house of communication, but also the house of goddess. I'm wondering if there were some maybe religious influence or something in the household at home that really kind of set the stage here. If there's some sort of story that goes back to maybe a belief system growing up. I don't know that, but I would definitely ask that question to this person. Would you kind of, what are your thoughts on that,
Yeah.
KristaLyn?
So I actually have that in my notes as well. But even thinking about how Mars is the ruler of the Sun and Saturn in this case.
Yep.
So we see that they actually defer back to this. And also there is that T square. Mars is almost by degree at curtailed passage. So halfway through his retrograde, he's not in his strongest point of his own cycle, not in his favorite house, square to Jupiter, opposite Saturn and the Sun. There's a big energy happening there where this person almost, it feels like, if I don't have conflict, what am I doing? If I don't have tension in my life, can I feel safe? So these are things that I would take these questions to a therapist or to someone who can really work with this with you on a more long-term, prolonged process, so you can work through this, because they can be alchemized into something else, into a different way of seeing things. Again, I'm strong in conflict and I'm assertive. That's the other way that we can see things when we're not just simply receiving the pressure, the conflict, and the tension of this. When we actually say, hey, I thrive with this energy and I can be proactive with it, that might help to just be direct in conversation, to be clear and concise in conversation, and to be an open listener. We cannot discount that Jupiter is there almost mitigating this opposition and saying, hey, we can all nurture each other and make sure that, each individual in this is nurtured and find compromise. I think that that's a very helpful thing to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. I want to build on that and say that, when we're looking at this chart and we're thinking about, okay, like, what's the seventh house look like? We've kind of like talked a lot about like, okay, this is difficult. I love that you looked at that wonderful Jupiter as mitigating. And I also want to look to the moon, right? When we talk about communication, the moon is the insect luminary, right? So being born at night, the moon would have been the brightest luminary in the sky, brighter than the sun, obviously it's dark. And the moon in Gemini in the fifth house, right, which is it's a good house, as we say. I think the moon in Gemini is curious, intellectual. It wants to ask questions. There's a real beauty here. And so maybe there's something to like part of the way, and it makes a supportive, it makes a sextile to that Sun Saturn conversation, and it makes a trine to that Mars. So there's also like, maybe one of the outlets to this is to get curious, right? Is to keep asking questions, right? And as part of the sort of communication process, right? Like as you're doing right now, what's my seventh house look like? How can I improve my relationship? In some ways, I think part of the answer is in the constant questioning, if you will.
Yeah. I also, to build on that, I think where the question is coming from is very much living in that third house, which makes so much sense. The sun and the ruler being in the third house, we're in a mental game, but this mental game of us like blaming ourselves, that's Saturn in Aries, saying, I must be the problem. I must be doing this. If we transition to the moon and lean into living in our moon for a little bit, we get not only communication, but creative, passionate, fun communication. That's where the curiosity comes in. The fifth house of fun, creativity, childlike wonder, love, and romance. Maybe that's something that we can put more emphasis on rather than the law and the regulation that might come first as instinct from that Mars, Sun, and Saturn, Mars dynamic. If we lean into the moon and get creative and have more fun and allow ourselves to relax, as the moon is trine the ascendant, it wants to support that. It actually naturally has that there. It's even trine Mars by sign. So it's saying, hey, like, this is how we can kind of settle these things a little bit. Curiosity is going to answer these questions that we have about God or about worldview or about all of these things that we feel very passionate and driven to pursue, especially in relationships. So that fifth house also playing a big role in helping us loosen the tension.
Ooh, I'm reminded of something a client actually told me, to just write it out, write a letter to herself, write it out, maybe erase it. And I've heard this advice. I think Mark Twain said something similar of like, you get angry, write a letter to someone, don't send it. but this idea of that maybe like we can get to this more in a moment. We talk about transits and things, but maybe there's a value in just like getting curious by actually, if writing is something that you enjoy, or whether that's making art or something, like maybe trying to explore this creatively by writing out your thoughts and actually being more productive with your question and being more productive with how you ask questions, as opposed to using questions as a weapon against yourself.
And letting the questions take you outside of the box instead of being in an echo chamber. Yeah. So
Brilliant.
this is another indicator to me that maybe talking with someone, a friend or somebody, might actually help you get out of your own head a little bit, get someone else's opinion on the situation, because we're limited to our own perceptions in so many things. I do this all the time. I will literally go for a walk, take someone with me, talk out loud. They don't even have to respond or even listen. And as long as I can talk out loud and I'm moving and I'm kind of in that space of motion, I can start figuring things out. And maybe that'll help too.
And you know, this is more anecdotal than anything, but to add on to that, I also have a moon in Gemini, Mercury in Pisces, which Mercury and Pisces can be like all the thoughts in once, and it can really get distracting. And I've also noticed that sometimes the way I think is actually through talking or writing. Like, so that what you said, that experience of talking to a friend is actually how I gain clarity. And if it stews in my head, it just becomes like a nightmare. And there's something really beautiful about the way I process things. So that's kind of something I would explore for this person too, is how do you think best? Like, what is your thought process? How do you learn? How do you, I want to say, how do you process your thoughts?
Okay. So the next thing I'm thinking about moving into is some of the timing, because there is a lot of timing coming up after we talk about these quotes. Oh my gosh. Yes, please.
You want to do the quotes first? Okay.
Yes, please.
So I was laughing. So usually KristaLyn always gives us some really profound, ancient astrological wisdom from, you know, source text. But this month I got to do the quotes. So we are getting a Brene Brown quote, because I was like, man, we're all having a rough time. And I feel like sometimes Brene Brown can just be like that go-to, just like balm for all of our souls.
Especially with Venus retrograde coming up for all of us. Yeah.
So I chose this quote, and KristaLyn, I'll let you read it if you don't mind, since I chose it.
Sure. Yeah. So love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow. A connection that only can be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. Get it, Brene Brown.
I love this quote, because I think it comes back to that beginning. That's my statement earlier, is that, like, yes, we look to the seventh, we look to Venus, but we also have to look to ourselves. Because if we have a hard time accepting love, or we're trying to always take the responsibility, right? That could be a little bit Mars Libra too, right? Like Saturn, like that weight of like all responsibilities and relationships are mine. If it goes wrong, it's like, what did I do wrong? Right. And I think this quote is a reminder that, hey, relationships take two full people. And it's important to remember that the relationships you had in the past, while might necessary to your growth, right? No failure. Going forward, it's important that you choose partners that can hold the equal weight of the relationship, right? It's not just your responsibility to become the perfect vessel to then wait for love, right? None of us are perfect. It is a constant stage of growth. Can you grow with someone?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think one of the things Saturn teaches us the most isn't necessarily self-deprecation, which is an unskillful way that we can sometimes perceive this. But if you find yourself in self-deprecation and you want to alchemize that or flip it to a strength, it's boundaries, it's standards. Maybe these people have not been actually meeting your standards and you've been having to compromise in these relationships, which has then been setting things up for not the sturdiest of long-term relationships. Also keeping that in mind, I do want to say, you know, we've been talking about this a lot. you've been going through a hard time since about 2017. And if that relates to you heavily, 2016, 2017, just know that time is very much coming out of its darker period, or its sort of healing period. You're coming into a whole new phase of your life over the next 30 years. And I'm looking at progressed moon phases here, which is something we would get into in more personal consultations.
Yeah.
But just know the hard stuff, it was hard. It was very hard, and you did it. Emphasis on the did. You're coming out of that now. So the fact that you're having this clarity, the fact that you're thinking about this right now, the fact that you're working on taking care of yourself a little bit is very on time and appropriate, and you're doing the best thing.
Absolutely. I know we'll get to timing in just a moment. I have one more set of quotes, but I think it's just kind of set the stage. Something you kind of you touched on is, there's been some this person's undergone some very difficult transits, right? Like Saturn has Saturn's been going through their 7th house, right? There's been eclipses on the angles, right? This has been a whole, for the first house. I'm sorry. I transposed it. We have the opposite chart. The first house, right? Like Saturn, your first house is just like, who am I psychologically, physically? Like you have just been birthed into a new human, right? These are some very difficult transits we're starting to come out of. And we're about to experience Venus retrograde in your 7th, which is very significant for reasons KristaLyn will explain. But to me, I'm thinking about, and I was kind of like teaser here, this Venus retrograde really feels like an opportunity for reflection and cleansing of that whole 7th house topic in a way that's kind of going to set the stage too. This person's also getting ready in a couple of years for their 2nd Saturn return of how do you work with Saturn. So I would say there's some really beautiful opportunities coming up in this chart. Should we do the second quote, or do you want to add on to transits and then we can build on to the last quotes we have?
Let's do the transits, and then we can talk about the last quote as a nice closing motivational thing. I think that'll be really good. Because I'm so excited to be talking about just thinking about, even on this person's birthday, you said they're being rebirthed and have been. They absolutely are. And that's going to be a hallmark of them for this year. Because if you look at the solar return, which is the chart of this person's birthday this year, we actually see that there was a moon Pluto conjunction in the sky at 0 degrees Aquarius. And if you look at their chart here, 0 degrees Aquarius is pretty important for you. It is your actual ascending degree. Beyond that, when we look at annual perfections, which is another timing technique that sort of helps you know which planets are your little like partner buddy for the year. When we take that from the ascendant and perfect it, it's in a 9th house year, which makes Venus the time lord. So Venus is active. She is the one who is doing the moving and the shaking this year. And of course, she's the one doing the retrograde through that 7th house. For reference, the preparation for this retrograde began on June 19th. It will go until July 22nd when she does station retrograde. She will be retrograde through September 3rd. And then all of the things that come up between now and then will find their resolution, or at least be able to find closure in order to move on by October 7th. So I just wanted to give you these dates to work with. It's also worth noting that when you perfect from the sect light, which would be the moon, we get back to that 1st house, which means that 1st house active by the moon's standards and by just you as a person. And we had that Pluto moon conjunction on your birthday in that area. So that would have been, it was probably quite a birthday.
Oh man, I want to pop up. I'm trying to, my brain can't. Well, I want to go back, and I'll show that in a moment. I'll pull up the chart to see just what, they're in a 9th house perfection year, and it might be worth going to see what other years 9th house perfection years fall in, which I'll get to in a moment, just to sort of think about. You know, there's a lot of things coming up, but for me, right, sometimes I think we can, without getting lost, because this is a very short segment, right? And if this was a client consultation, right, it's easy to go, okay, there's this, we can kind of like track out all the transits. But I really, really would want to focus on this Venus retrograde for a few different reasons. I think that this Venus retrograde would, before I start going into my theories about Venus retrograde, KristaLyn, would you mind explaining for those people who don't know, like the, I want to say the astronomy of like what's actually happening with Venus retrograde?
You want
and
me to
maybe a little
bust
bit of the
these?
symbolism as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
my favorite way of explaining a retrograde, especially for the inner planets, which is just Mars and Venus, really, because they are the planets between the sun and Earth. Those are the ones that have their circles around the sun,
Yep.
where we can see them from the outside. The other ones, we're kind of between the sun and Earth, so it looks a little bit different. But in this case, for Venus, what it looks like is, if you imagine my head being Earth and
Yep.
this giant crystal being the sun, and then my little fidget toy being Venus, how we see things is, we are Earth, the sun is here, and Venus is going to go around the sun on the other side. Then she's going to come back around. And so what we see is Venus is going around the sun, as we do. Nothing different there. But from our perspective, she looks like she's just going back and forth. So we have the direct motion and the retrograde motion. That's the astronomy of why we see these planets move backwards when they're not actually moving backwards. It's just that we are looking at a 2D perspective of a 3D thing.
Absolutely. So what happens is, when Venus goes retrograde, essentially she disappears from our view, right? We said she's invisible, but she actually gets, like you said, gets closer. So there's a sense that Venus is with us, but then also there's a sense of, please step in here. But I always think of the Venus retrograde as, more than anything, a really beautiful opportunity to, I want to say, let some Venus stories end so others can be reborn, right? So, Venus retrograde classically might be a time where, right, this is pop culture stuff that I think really checks out. Old partners might come back, right? You might have some sort of reminiscing of, what did I do wrong, right? To me, even the fact that you sent us this question is already you working with your Venus retrograde. What is the failure of these relationships? What did I do? And I think a lot of this Venus retrograde for you might be a process of letting go and forgiving, of maybe doing some work around those old relationships. Why didn't they work? Not just on your end, but like, what was actually not happening, right? Was there, I think of that too. Sometimes that Mars, Libra, the Sun in Aries feels a little push-pull to me. Like, I want to be seen, but then I also don't know how to get close, right? And so if there could be a safe process of almost exploring these past relationships to like let some things go, and even some really beautiful work around maybe even working with Venus. I know Venus retrograde, like magically we wouldn't work with, but even like your connection to Venus, if you're even thinking about like being kinder to yourself in some way, right? Like even like lighting a candle on Friday for Venus Day, or even, really, tapping into that natal Venus and Taurus. Like I think of like buying yourself flowers, like even being your own partner during this retrograde, and really leaning into this so that when Venus goes direct, right, you can just kind of let the past go. Also pointing out that this particular retrograde cycle taps into a story that would have come up 8 years ago for you, last time Venus was retrograde this part of your chart. And that's something to keep in mind as well, is like, okay, what stories are coming back from 8 years ago that I can like let go of, which ties into a whole Venus star point conversation, which we don't have time to get into now. I'd love your thoughts to build on, KristaLyn.
Yeah. So I'm also thinking about, Venus is the time lord. So again, if you've been thinking these things, especially since your birthday this year, around in April, that makes sense. But
Yes.
even more so, because this is when the eclipses started kicking in too. And we are having the final eclipses in those, the Scorpio and Taurus axis. And if you look at this, that is your midheaven and your IC. Venus, the new time lord, is on the IC. So this has been something that for the last 2 years, you've been evolving your home and work balance, let's say. But also now that Venus is the time lord, she's been thinking about relationships. She's been thinking about, how do I feel comfortable in relationships? How do relationships suit my ideals? What are the intellectual and belief boundaries that are important to me, and who's going to match those? And now we're going into this retrograde where maybe we're deciding, like you said, this is a retrograde in Leo. So maybe it's me doing me for a little while and realizing that the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself, like Brene said. But also, who can match that? Who can complement this? Who can be a co-pilot rather than trying to take over the wheel?
Yeah. For me, I'm trying to be, I know we're like short on time. This Venus retrograde to me is like right now, this is the transit I would focus on more than anything. I would focus getting through this transit, and then let's consult the chart for another reading and move on from there. Those would be my thoughts. A question for you, KristaLyn, is with this person, the more I'm staring at this chart, I'm seeing that Venus, it's the insect benefic. She's angular. She's in her own home, right? I feel like so much of this chart too, there's a certain sense of like, how can this person strengthen their connection to Venus and really work with Venus? Which is something I think about. Yes, it's a Venus perfection year, but also during this Venus retrograde. And I kind of threw out some things like maybe buying yourself some flowers, indulging in a nice meal. But I'd love your thoughts on that, KristaLyn, what you think this person could do to work with Venus and strengthen that connection.
When I look at Venus in the chart, I'm thinking childhood or ancestry. Yep. So to connect with their Venus and the way that they might recognize Venus the most, I would say you might even talk to the matrons in your life, the mothers in your life, the crones in your life, or the maidens in your life, and just start thinking about the people, maybe particularly women, or nurturing energies or nurturing roles of people that you grew up with. And going back to who you used to be when you were younger, going back to the way you saw the world before you probably went through your first Saturn return and realized, wow, things can be hard and I need to protect myself. This is your IC. This is the going back to the roots situation. And again, your childhood, your upbringing, those kinds of things may remind you what safety looks like for you. And now that you are an adult and you are empowered in your own energy and you are, in a place in your life where you get to call your own shots, maybe bringing some of those things back into your life so that you can say, this is mine, this makes me feel comfortable, and this helps me feel like who I am.
Oh, that's brilliant. Just adding to that, right? There's a lot of fire and air in this chart, right? Like I think we talked about that sort of like, like that Sun, Mars, Saturn conversation can be very heady, right? It can kind of be stewing your thoughts, and that, Moon Gemini is all like, how do I connect to people through intellectual engaging, right? So that, and Aquarius rising, there's a lot of like air. And as you mentioned, yes, that Venus in Taurus and Earth sign, right? Fixed Earth is in the 4th house with the, hanging out, occupying a space with the North Node. So there is that connection to ancestry. I'm wondering if growing up, this person, if one of the ways they can connect to ancestry is through like some grounding practices, like maybe family recipes or gardening, right? I'm wondering if there were some grounding practices in childhood that this person can go back to, not only to connect to that Venus in like the sense of like ancestry, but also to help them ground themselves physically, right? And like calm the nervous system.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, I tried to put it in the comments of the live thing, but I don't have the same controls as I usually do. If you want that 10% off of a consultation with us, if you are someone who is a viewer here and this is not your chart, again, if this is your chart, we're going to be emailing you 100% off of a consultation with us. But you can also get 10% off no matter who you are by using the code CANCERAMA. All one word. Cancer is in the zodiac sign, AMA as in Ask Me Astros, on each of our websites or by emailing you, right, CV? And that way you'll get 10% off of a consultation with us. And you can use that for both of us.
Absolutely. And I think actually my website should be working now.
Okay,
I hit a new website. So thank you. Shall we, any final thoughts? We can end on these final quotes and then kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts for this person are, again, hold your own seems to be the phrase that comes to mind when I look at this. Like, yeah, there are other people out there. Yes, you want companionship and you deserve companionship. I'm not saying don't get it. I'm saying first comes self-love. Second comes the people who can actually do that with you. It's not a do that for you. It's a do that with you. And once you, like the Brene Brown quote, which is so perfect, CV, thank you for bringing that in. Once you acknowledge how awesome you are, you will be able to show that more. And then the person who can appreciate it will be able to see it. And then you'll find each other and it'll be maybe more of a long-term thing if that's what you're looking for. But also don't judge yourself for the amazing short-term relationships that you may have. That's totally all right as well.
And yeah, I agree. And actually, I'm going to frame my final thoughts around my final quotes, if I may. So the last thing that was coming up for me about this whole question is like a question I would ask myself what I would ask this client to contemplate during this Venus retrograde is, what does a healthy relationship look like, right? Do you have healthy relationships with your friends? That's awesome. We didn't mention this, like the relationships you have with your friends are very telling about the relationships you have with your, significant others. So if you have really good relationship with your friends, maybe it's harder to find dating. Maybe there's something of like, okay, maybe I know I'm not picking so well here. Anyway, I thought this was funny. I was thinking about Frida Kahlo, who, of course, if you don't know, famous artist, I want to say Mexican surrealist, but or surrealist, and astrologers use her chart all the time, which we won't go into. But we think of her. She was married to Diego Rivera, which was another famous artist that sort of was the their love was sort of a center of her life in some sense, right? We know them through their relationship with each other. And I was thinking about some quotes from her, and I was like, which are, "I love you more than my own skin, and take a lover who looks at you like maybe you are a bourbon biscuit." And we think of Frida Kahlo so romantic and gives us these quotes, which if you think about are really kind of like disturbing, right? Like, no, never love anyone more than your own skin. Like, don't do that. But it also makes me think of like, I'm kind of being cheeky here, but like, what is the idea of love that we fantasize versus what really is? Like, I was thinking about these quotes from Frida Kahlo, and then I was thinking about how like Diego Rivera famously like slept with her sister and they still got back together. Like, this was a very toxic, unhealthy relationship. So, I'd be asking yourself too, right? Like, what does a healthy relationship actually look like? Am I looking for romance? Am I looking for reality? These quotes a lot. I was kind of being cheeky, like putting them there. It's a lot to explore, but I really wanted to sort of offer those questions up as well, right? Like, what is a healthy relationship?
Yeah.
Did that land, KristaLyn?
No, I think it's a really great question for contemplation, and a really great thing to cap this off. It's perfect.
I love you more than my own skin. Like, don't do that. And there we are. Okay. This is the final slide. Do you want to take us home, KristaLyn?
Yeah. So again, this was Ask Me Astros. We will be doing another one next month. We have a really good time with this. So it's very exciting to be able to answer your questions. If you have a question that you want us to look at next month, we tend to do these broadcasts around the turn of the solar season, which is typically between the 18th and the 22nd of the month. We'll let you know exactly when those are coming up. But you can email us questions@askmeastros.com, or just go to askmeastros.com and click the button to submit your question, whichever one works easiest for you. And we will take a look at what transits are coming up, which person, kind of is really feeling that. And then we'll pull that into the conversation. You'll get to see how astrologers actually dive into charts. And of course, whether your chart is chosen or not, you get a discount on a consultation with us so that you do get to have the peace of mind you are looking for.
Absolutely. And I'm going to just add to that to say that if you go to askmeastros.com, you can also sign up for our Patreon, where we have monthly offerings. We take people through, I'm going to say, we have astrology workshops, we have astrology sort of teachings, right? It's a really beautiful astrology community for those wishing to learn more about astrology in the sense of like empowering their everyday lives. So check out those offerings. And again, we also do every Monday, we do our coffee talks on IG Live, where we go through and we answer your questions. So if we don't get to your question in this 1 hour a month, we have an hour every week that we devote just to answering people's questions. So please, please, please submit. Most likely, unless you ask us something really crazy, if it's sincere, we will always direct you in a path of where someone can answer you. But yeah, we will make our best effort to answer your question. And with that, I am CV Henriette of Art of the Zodiac, and you are?
I am at The Real KristaLyn, and my name is just KristaLyn. It's awesome to be able to talk with you guys, to be able to hang out with CV, and we hope that you have a very amazing beginning to your summer or beginning to your winter, whatever the solstice has brought for you.
Fantastic, and goodbye, friends.